Eleanor Roosevelt and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Her Legacy of Leadership, a documentary by Parker Phillips. When you hear the name Eleanor Roosevelt, what do you think of? A rich and privileged niece of President Teddy Roosevelt. B. A famous and groundbreaking American First Lady. C. An outspoken American feminist and champion of human rights around the globe. D. All of the above. If you answered all of the above, you are correct. Miss Roosevelt in her lifetime of leadership was all of these things. Born into one of the richest families in New York City in 1884, she had a life of privilege, but she lost most of her immediate family and was an orphan at the age of 10 and lived with her grandmother until the age of 15. When she was 15, she was sent to school in England to the Allenswood Academy. It was there when she met headmistress Marie Vestry, who was a noted feminist and would shape Eleanor's thinking as an independent young woman. Miss Vestry did not believe that women should see themselves as wives and mothers, but should also strive to become leaders in their communities. She returned to New York to make her debut into society in 1902 at the age of 17. In that summer, she met her father's fifth cousin, Franklin, while visiting family. They were married 3 years later in 1905, with her uncle, then President, Teddy Roosevelt, giving her away. Eleanor took on the role of a wife and mother and had 6 children, but that was not all she did during this time. In the years before her husband became president, Eleanor Roosevelt worked with the Women's Trade Union League to support the rights of women and children in the workplace, and became a powerful and influential member of the Democratic Party. In 1927, she founded the Todd Hunter School for Girls, which she taught independent thought and social engagement. She was a teacher there 3 days a week until she became First Lady. After her husband's presidential election, she set out to change the role of First Lady and, according to her biographer, Blanche Cook, became the most controversial First Lady in United States history. With her husband's support, she became the first presidential spouse to hold her own press conferences, speak at the National Party convention, and even had her own syndicated newspaper column called My Day. Eleanor made a point of making sure she earned as much money giving lectures as her husband was paid to be president. She became active in the civil rights movement and made groundbreaking use of mass media to get her message out. When World War II hit, she joined the ranks of women throughout the country, taking on leadership roles and co-chaired the Office of Civil Defense. She supported increased roles for women and African Americans during the war and advocated that women be allowed to take over factory jobs in the men's absence.
At the present time, it is of paramount importance that the women and girls of our country be given training so that they may do their share in the war emergency. How this training is given and who does it is of great interest to us all.
Eleanor was 60 when her husband died in 1945. She had already achieved more than most women would ever dream in a lifetime. But she was not done. She thought that she would retire from public service and famously told the press, "This story is over." But it turned out that her best and most important work was yet to come. After World War II and Hitler's Nazi reign in Europe ended, it was clear to everyone that the United Nations Charter did not define the rights of all humans well enough and that something else was needed. In December of 1945, President Harry Truman asked Eleanor to become a delegate to the United Nations General Assembly. In 1946, she became the first ever chairperson to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. For the next 2 years, she worked alongside 17 other commission members to create what would become her ultimate legacy, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When it was completed, she called it the International Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
We stand today at the threshold of a great event, both in the life of the United Nations and in the life of mankind. This Universal Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men everywhere. We hope its proclamation by the General Assembly will be an event comparable to the proclamation of the Declaration of the Rights of Man by the French people in 1789, the adoption of the Bill of Rights by the people of the United States, and the adoption of comparable declarations at different times in other countries.
The Declaration contains 30 articles that express the rights of every human being on the planet. While the text was written primarily by John Peters Humphrey and Renee Cassin, it was Eleanor Roosevelt who stressed from the beginning that it must be presented as a declaration much like Americans' Declaration of Independence, and not a treaty that would be legally binding for any country to sign. This proved to be a key move in its universal adoption and its continued use today. The Declaration acts as a guidepost for the legal documents that countries create themselves. The Declaration was adopted by the countries of the United Nations on December 10, 1948. In a speech in 1995, Pope John Paul II called the Declaration of Human Rights one of the highest expressions of the human conscience of our time. The Declaration of Human Rights holds the Guinness World Record for being the most translated document, and it has served as the main influence for many national constitutions created after 1948, and more than 20 legal binding treaties on human rights. Who could have imagined that a young girl born into New York high society in the late 1800s would lead a group of people who in the next century would create the standard document that every country on the planet would use to define the rights of its people? Eleanor Roosevelt continued to serve in the UN on the Commission of Human Rights until 1953. In the years after, she continued to be politically active in the Democratic Party, and in 1961, she accepted an appointment from President Kennedy to chair the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women. Eleanor Roosevelt died in her home in New York in 1962 at the age of 78. Her funeral was attended by Presidents Kennedy and Eisenhower and many other heads of states. Speaking at her funeral, Vice President Adlai Stevenson said, "What other human being has touched and transformed the experience of so many? She would rather light a candle than curse the darkness, and her glow has warmed the world." Eleanor Roosevelt may have been born into a privileged and genteel life, but she never let that define her. She used the advantages she had to fight for the rights of those that were not born as lucky as she was. She dedicated her life to fighting for the rights of everyone, no matter what their gender, race, or how much they had. The legacy of her leadership continues to influence both men and women today and will for the years to come, and she remains one of the greatest humanitarians that the United States has ever seen.